But in the latest, Chinese President Xi Jinping is likely to skip a summit of G20 leaders in India next week. Quoting sources, news agency Reuters stated Premier Li Qiang is expected to represent Beijing at the summit. Now, the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping held talks on the sidelines of the BRICS summit a few days ago. However, ties between the countries remain at crossroads. Now, China doesn't have an envoy in India for over 10 months. On Monday, China officially released the 2023 edition of its so-called Standard Map. Now, the map incorporates its claims over Arunachal Pradesh, Aksai Chin region, Taiwan and the disputed South China Sea. India maintains that the state of Arunachal Pradesh has always been and will always be an integral part of the country. With China's growing belligerence, the border has become a battleground for testing wills and resilience. Analysts say China's completely unfounded claims initially extend only to Taiwan, a part of Arunachal Pradesh where the 6th Dalai Lama was said to have been born. Since the 2000s, however, China has been claiming Arunachal Pradesh in its entirety. Pertinent to remember here, independent India has been exercising sovereignty over it. Arunachal Pradesh became a union territory in 1972 and a state in 1987. Arunachal Pradesh is also located at the confluence of the international borders of China, Myanmar and Bhutan, giving it strategic importance. Now, this extension of territorial claims indicates a concerted strategy consistent with China's stance on the East and South China Sea disputes. The Chinese map also includes the Aksai Chin region. Chinese aggression has sparked clashes along the mostly rugged, mountainous border known as the line of actual control. Amid Xi Jinping's irrational territorial ambitions, both sides have increasingly militarized their border policies and shown no indication of backing down. The situation on the border remains tense due to China's violation of norms. Beijing and New Delhi are hardening their positions on either side of the line of actual control. Now, India is firm. Peace and tranquility in border areas is essential. New Delhi says it is fully prepared and committed to protecting sovereignty and dignity. G20 is the premier forum for international economic cooperation and plays an important role in shaping and strengthening global architecture and governance. The G20 members represent around 85% of the global GDP and over 75% of global trade and about 2/3 of the world's population. For more on this latest development, we are now being joined by Dr. Shrikant Kondapalli, who is a professor in Chinese study at the Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. He's also served at the Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, New Delhi, for nearly 12 years. So thank you so much for joining us. My first question to you, with these latest developments, with Xi Jinping perhaps not being at the G20 summit, according to news reports, what do you make of this? What is your reading of the situation?
Well, at the moment, it is only a speculation based on a Reuters report about the Chinese president skipping possibly the G20 meeting. We have seen President Putin not attending the BRICS meeting in Johannesburg last week, but there was a virtual meeting. And Foreign Minister Lavrov represented President Putin in Johannesburg. Likewise, it is speculated that President Xi Jinping may not be around in the Delhi G20 meeting. However, Premier Li Qiang, who took over as the premier in March this year at the National People's Congress resolution, it is speculated that he may attend the meeting. All of these are in speculation because when National Security Advisor Mr. Ajit Doval met with the Foreign Minister of China, Wang Yi, in Johannesburg for the Security Advisors meeting last month, it was suggested that President Xi will attend the G20 meeting. However, there is a new speculation now with these two reports coming from somebody from an Indian from China, as well as another quoted by the Reuters. So the speculation suggests that President Xi may not attend the G20 meeting.
Right.
So that is what we have right now, but contradictory kind of reports. There is still a lot of time for the G20, and so I think these speculations, we need not straight away go into those.
Right. So while the speculation is rife and while we're just postulating on this matter, should President Xi Jinping not attend the G20? And with Putin also not being there, do we already see perhaps an emergence of a G18 instead? And what bearing does it have on the existing members of the grouping?
Well, since the Bali summit meeting, the G20 had become 2 versus 18. Russia, China versus the rest of the 18 in G20. And when we look at the foreign ministerial meeting of the G20 in Goa, the finance ministers meeting held in Pune, and the central bank, leaders of the G20 meeting, it is speculated that the 2 versus 18 formula would be replicated in New Delhi as well when the G20 summit takes place. We do not know exactly how this would pan out. However, the Bali summit declaration, which for the first time mentioned more political issues such as the Ukrainian crisis, it appears that the New Delhi summit also will have a huge impact of the Ukrainian conflict. However, India had smartly diverted the attention of all the members towards the impact of the Ukrainian war rather than on Ukrainian conflict as such. For example, India had taken the lead on looking at the impact of the Ukrainian conflict in energy prices increase, food prices increase, fertilizer prices increase. And secondly, it has also suggested that African Union become the member of the G20. Thirdly, India also smartly diverted the attention towards the global south countries. So all these three have happened while since Bali, the G20 has been hijacked for the Ukrainian conflict. And so the 2:18 formula has come about in the G20. Originally, G20 was established for the resurrection of the global economy following the global financial crisis in 2007-8. Subsequently, there were several discussions in this regard. However, Ukrainian conflict overshadowed all the G20 discussions in the past 1 year since the February 28th launching of the Ukraine war.
Right. Sir, let's also not forget that this speculation around President Xi Jinping not attending the G20 summit, it comes in the backdrop of China publishing its standard map that includes Arunachal Pradesh in its territory. How do you read this? Do you think this script is kind of pre-written, wherein he also had objection to the use of Sanskrit language ahead of the BRICS, and then China goes ahead and publishes its standard map that includes a state that India claims its own, and now speculation around Xi Jinping perhaps not attending the G20 summit. What is your reading of this timeline of events?
We did see a pattern when Chinese leaders are coming to India. We have seen spectacular transgressions on the border. When President Xi came to New Delhi last time in September 2014, we had the tumor incident in the border areas. It was reported that Prime Minister Modi asked President Xi Jinping in Hyderabad House, what about the transgressions that are happening right then when the two leaders are meeting? It was reported that President Xi feigned ignorance of the event that has happened in the border areas in Chumar. Now that is very, um, uh, it is impossible because Xi Jinping is also the chairman of the Central Military Commission, which controls the military. So either Xi Jinping is trying to uh, ignore this issue and give a wrong answer, or it is also speculated that he doesn't have much control over the military, which is also quite possible because some rogue elements may have created the Galwan incident when the local commanders could have escalated the conflict. Having said that, we have also seen, even when the leaders have not visited India, Chinese leaders, we have seen 3 times before the Chinese have standardized the names. One was on April 13, 2017. Some 17 place names have been changed also into Pinyin and Chinese language. Secondly, in January 2021, when China changed some 15 location names in Arunachal Pradesh.
Right.
And thirdly, in April 2023, when they have changed 11 place names, including Zimatang and others. The one that has been changed in the last 4 or 5 days is also about the standardization of the names that they mention about southern Tibet, or as we call Arunachal Pradesh. So this is basically a psychological warfare that China is conducting.
Right. Professor Kondapalli, also very interestingly, what do you read about the US-China relations here, with especially with top US officials to China, including Commerce Secretary, the Treasury Secretary, and the Secretary of State, among others, who made recent visits to China? Do you see a change in equations between the United States and China here?
Indeed, one of the strong points why President Xi Jinping has to come to Delhi for the G20 meeting is possibly a meeting with President Biden in New Delhi, because President Biden has confirmed his visit to New Delhi for the G20. In the background, connecting to your question on US-China relations, it is for the past 2.5 years, since late Trump administration, the tariff wars have been imposed on China because the Chinese have excess trade with the United States, while China does not allow the United States to export goods to China. Also, many Chinese companies have invested in United States. A similar privilege has not been given by China to the United States. So the Trump administration had imposed tariffs, which the Chinese retaliated. But the most important thing is that in the 19th Communist Party Congress, President Xi Jinping mentioned that China wants to occupy the center stage, which is now occupied by the United States. China wants to replace the United States. So this is the most crucial passage in the Communist Party documents, which has created friction with the United States. So the decoupling process, or some call this as de-risking process, has been initiated since late Trump, which Biden administration continued. Right. So as you mentioned, there is a measure to cushion the bilateral relations during Blinken's visit, during Treasury Secretary Yellen's visit in July, as well as Kissinger's visit, and currently the Commerce Minister Raimondo's visit. All these are meant to cushion the bilateral relations, but it appears China is adamant on continuing the friction with the United States, because they follow the policy of replacing the United States.
Right. Professor Kondapalli, also now talking about India and China, the two are said to have had bilateral, informal talks rather, on the sidelines of the BRICS summit, where China said that they had an in-depth conversation, although India said that it had an informal conversation, and also no Chinese ambassador to India has been appointed for at least 10 months. So what does that convey?
Well, in the last 6 or 7 years, there are 4 Chinese ambassadors who have been changed prematurely without completing their term. It began with Chang Weiwei, Chang Yang, with the Luo Chao, um, 2 other ambassadors, and the latest being Sun Weidong. 5 of these ambassadors have not finished their term. It is generally believed in the Chinese foreign ministry circles that India posting is a kind of punishment posting for them because of the kind of animation that is there in the Indian conditions, specifically territorial dispute or other related matters. So generally, there is a reluctance on the part of the Chinese diplomatic corps to choose India as their destination. Of course, if the Communist Party decides to send somebody, it is that is the diktat, so they will have to follow. Nevertheless, given the kind of stalemate that we have seen so far, post Galwan, and the number of differences that have arisen between the 2 countries, it would be hard to see a new Chinese ambassador coming up in any time near future. So that is one. Secondly, in terms of the meetings, informal meetings, Prime Minister Modi shook hands with President Xi in Bali, but no discussion took place at the time last year. In this meeting in BRICS in Joburg a few days ago, the speculation, as you mentioned rightly, that the Chinese have asked for a structured dialogue, while the Indian side had asked for an informal meeting because of the Chinese reluctance to vacate the lands that they occupied in Depsang Plains and in Demchok area. So India has followed from June 17, 2020, a line which was articulated by Dr. Jaishankar, that is, unless until peace and tranquility prevails on the border, there will not be any bilateral relations. So flowing from that, India had asked for only an informal summit because it is incumbent on the Chinese to first vacate those disputed lands in Aksai Chin and Ladakh areas.
Right. Thank you so much, Professor Kondapalli, for giving us that detailed analysis on this subject. Thank you so much for your time.